So today's topic is the hidden benefits of transaction labels. So we will be covering how you can use transaction labels to really simplify your workflow, also automate your workflow. If you're using transaction labels already, you probably see a couple of the obvious benefits, but hopefully we'll touch on some that you may not be aware of. And if you're not using them at all, you should be, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so that's what today is. So let's dive on in. So let's first talk about what transaction labels are. They are an additional classification that you can assign to your transactions. So whether that be residential or commercial, and you can even break those down even further. Maybe you've got residential single family, residential condo, etc. So really allowing you to classify those transactions for a few, and then you'll get a bunch of benefits from doing that. So let's first hop over to admin and the place where you actually set up those transaction labels there. So here you can see I've got several different classifications of my, that I can use across my transactions. So I've got generically, I've got residential, I could have short sale, I could have single family residence, new construction, landed lot, etc. Right? They break commercial and residential separately. So maybe they'll have residential condo, residential new construction, residential single family, and then they'll have commercial, land and lot, etc. So it really depends on how you want to break it down, but basically this is where you would set those up. And doing so is super easy. Let's say I wanted to add townhouse here. Okay, I could do it that simply. And now once these are set up, then when you're throughout pipeline, you'll see a new drop down called transaction label. So when you're on your transaction, when you're filtering, etc. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. But here is where you want to set it up first so that all of that actually works throughout your account. So let's now go to see kind of some of the obvious benefits of using your transaction labels. So we've got them set up on our account. I'm going to head over to my transactions tab here. And here is where I see the first obvious benefit. So in addition to seeing which side of the transaction you have on the right side of this of your transaction name here, you can also at a glance see exactly what transaction label or transaction or property type that you've specified here, right? Some duplex, some residential, etc. So at a glance, I can see exactly what these property types or transaction labels are. Okay, so that's the first benefit. Another benefit is that I can filter on these. So let's say I go to my filter tab and I want to only see those transactions that are duplex, right? I can filter those and look at all of my duplex transactions. Okay, and I can combine these with other searches as well. Duplex, where I've got the listing side. So that gives me an additional way of looking at my transactions. Okay, so that's the first obvious benefit. Next, let's hop into a transaction here. And actually, let's make a new transaction. Whenever I'm adding a transaction or editing a transaction, I've got the ability to, in addition to specifying let's do random MLS number here. Now I have this drop down that allows me to specify the transaction label. Okay, so if this were, let's say, a single family residence, I could select that. And what that means, the benefit I wanted to discuss is that since I'm setting this up when I first create the transaction, I don't have to worry about that anymore. So I'm setting this as a single family residence. That aspect of the transaction is not going to change. So I set it this once and I forget it. In contrast, we'll sometimes see companies who will reflect the transaction type in their status. So maybe they'll say listing residential or listing condo or listing rental, etc. But doing that means that every time you change the status, you've got to do a little bit more analysis on the status to determine which one it is. which again, that's not necessary because the type of transaction this is not going to change. Set it once, forget it. Keep your statuses pure so that when you're changing status, you're really only having to determine what the status of the transaction is: pending, closed, etc. All right. So that's that second benefit there, is ease of entry. It keeps everything simple. I don't have to analyze too much every time I'm changing the status, which can happen regularly. Okay. So those are some of the main benefits. Now, some of the lesser known benefits are really revolve around how can I utilize this data. So I've got my transaction label set up. I've assigned it to my transactions. Now how can I maximize the usefulness of this information? So I'm going to leave this tab open, but open another one here and take you to the reports, because that's really how you can utilize the information that's in there, is either through my reporting or through my downloading, which is another method of reporting. So let's head on over to reports first. If I've got the commission module installed, which I do here, there are several reports here. For example, commissions and closings, where I can specify the label when I'm running my report, or pending commissions, where I can specify the label. So what this does is it allows me to run these reports, for example, see my pending commissions for a particular label. So for all my commercial, or for all my single family residence, etc. So it allows me to break down exactly that data specifically for that particular label. Okay. So those are the formal reports that I can do to analyze that data. I can also, if I head over to my transactions tab here, if I run any of these spreadsheet downloads or download any of these spreadsheets, when I do, and I've got one open here, when I do, I can sort by this label because that's downloaded as well. So you know your transaction downloads include all of your information for the entire transactions. And they're beneficial for being able to filter and sort on those so that you can look at that data however you need to. And that includes that label. So if I sort by the transaction label, which I already have here, maybe I want to look at all of the commission totals for the commercial, or for this particular transaction label, in this case commercial. Or maybe I want to look at for a particular agent, how many transaction an agent has done under commercial, which I can search for that also, but I can also look at that under this download. So let's say I wanted to look at total commissions for a particular transaction label. Highlight those and copy them and paste them into, let's say, a second worksheet, and then throw some totals down there, right? So again, this is just a full data dump. And then the second huge benefit that's maybe a little lesser known is auto-assigning checklists. So let's head back to the checklist. So when I'm assigning checklists, let's go over to this pending residential buyer checklist. When I'm assigning checklists, if I don't have this label specified, if you aren't using labels yet, you don't see this drop down. But once you do, then you're able to see this drop down and really further fine tune exactly when you want this checklist to be auto assigned. So in this case, I want it to always be assigned when my transaction is in the pending status and when my transaction type or my transaction label is residential. So as you can imagine, that really allows me to fine tune that this checklist only gets assigned when it's a residential transaction. And as you can imagine, if this weren't here, I would have to determine, well, let's see, this transaction's in pending and it's the buying side. So I've got this long list of tasks that need to be done. But if I'm not using the label, then I'm going to have to determine, well, if it's a residential, then I need these particular items. If it's commercial, then I need these particular items, etc. By specifying what type it is at this level and only including those tasks as appropriate, you don't have to do all that cleaning. That's for every transaction this would come on, that's less scrubbing that you need to do for that particular transaction, because you've got a much more finite list of tasks that are appropriate for that particular transaction type. Okay, So I cannot overemphasize enough how critical this is to saving time, and really that it gives you full control for you to be able to craft exactly when you want your checklist to appear and exactly what you want to be on them based on that level. Since this is a custom label and you're able to specify that, that really makes this a lot more custom. Okay, and let's take a quick look at how that works. That's why I left this one open here. So if I'm creating a new transaction like I am here, and let's say I've got this specified as an active listing, and I specify the my label as a single family residence, and I'm just going to do those just for illustrative purposes here. Once I add those, my listing residential checklist will automatically be assigned, right? So very appropriate for it being an active listing and for a single family residence. All right. And of course, we encourage you to load those up with those relative due dates whenever you can, because you can see how much more complete that is as soon as that gets added. Far less work because the due dates are already there. Okay. And then just to mention is that I mentioned how transaction labels are used to represent the type, the property type generally. If you're using it for something else, maybe for, let's say, tracking leads or anything else, which we've got a particular feature for tracking leads, but any other kind of workaround that you're putting something other than transaction type in that field, reach out to us and let us know. We would love to see what that is for a couple reasons. In a lot of cases, when we find that that's happening, there's typically a better way to actually store and manage that information that will help you more just for having it in that other place, but also for freeing up the transaction label so that you can use it for the property type. So please feel free to reach out to us for that reason. Also, if you're using it for a reason that really is well suited for that, that's helpful for us to know. Just from a system standpoint, to make sure that the system's working as high performance as it can for you. Also, if there's something we want to look at as a potential future feature or enhancement, that really helps us. So again, if you're using it for something other than transaction type, please reach out and let us know what that is. We'd love to hear it, possibly offer a better way of doing it, but possibly just learning from that. Okay? And that's all I've got for today.